Welcome everyone that is here, and I know we're going to have lots of folks continuing to join us. We had an incredible response to this event. This is the fall gathering of the TRUCEN network, and for those that are new, TRUCEN is an acronym, not pronounced TRUCEN, as I always say, a mistake that I made, I think, on day one of this job. I'm the president of Campus Compact, Bobby Lauer, and what TRUCEN stands for is the Research University Civic Engagement Network, and it's Campus Compact's network of R1 institutions. We have over 40 institutional members of TRUCEN, but we had over 180 people register for today's network session. So we were just talking amongst Davarian, Shalom, and I, and saying that when we started putting together this session, we envisioned a session that had between 30 and 50 folks, which has been pretty common for our TRUCEN gatherings, and we have a much larger crowd today, which we know is symbolic and emblematic of just how much hunger there is for the discussion that we're going to have today, and in particular for Davarian and his work. So I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to give everyone a little bit of a sense of how today's meeting is going to go. We've spent some really intentional time between Shalom and Davarian and I really hoping to design this in a way that really ensures that we honor the TRUCEN ethos of ensuring that this is really a space for conversation in addition to learning. So we're going to start with a keynote address from Davarian, which will be about 30 minutes long. We're then going to ask Shalom to come back, and he's going to provide a reflection and response around how this work and what this work means for him at UCLA and how they're thinking about it in the context of their own work. Then we're going to move into small group discussions where we're going to put people in small breakout groups of just 5 to 7 people. So really spaces where everyone should be able to contribute. And we're going to ask people to really think about some specific questions that we'll share with you, and also to elevate those onto a collective Jam board that I'm going to provide a link to, really ensuring that this is the beginning of a conversation, because what we know and why we know that there's so much excitement for this conversation is because these are issues, and what Davarian's talking about in his book are things that the entire field is wrestling with and wanting to really think thoughtfully about in terms of our action and practice. We're then going to come, and that's why I'm telling you this now, because I want people to stick around. We're going to come back together, and we're actually going to close out with almost 30 minutes of discussion between the group and particularly Davarian and Shalom, unpacking what came out of those small groups and really talking about what a future could look like and where work might need to go, what additional resources and conversations and spaces people are looking for. So with that, we're gonna get started, and just thank you again for everyone who has already joined us. We have a great group already, and I can see people keep jumping in. The title of today's session is The Role of Civic and Community Engagement in Our Cities, Past, Present, and the Future. And it is based off of Davarian's great book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. Davarian Baldwin, our keynote speaker today, has, in addition to author, has 2 important titles, in addition to others. Of course, we all carry multiple titles. I know he's a dad as well, but he's the Paul Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies, as well as the founding director of Smart Cities Research Lab at Trinity College, a proud Campus Compact member, I must say. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Davarian to let him get started.
Bobby, thank you so much for this opportunity and this time. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be in conversation and community with me. So as you can see now, I'm sharing my screen so we can begin what I hope is an invigorating and exciting conversation. As Bobby pointed out, and I just want to thank Campus Compact and TRUCEN in particular for allowing me to be here before you, that the title of my talk is The Role of Civic and Community Engagement in Our Cities, Past, Present, and the Future. So what I want to start with, something you all probably know quite well, is that right before our eyes, colleges and universities have become the biggest employers, real estate owners, healthcare providers, and even policing agents in major cities and college towns all across the country. The idea here is that schools can bring ideas and people together and generate new innovations. And now, from New York City's Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island to the recent Arizona State campus in Mesa, everyone wants a campus to serve as what we know as, what we call, an anchor institution. A perfect future example of this trend is the glittering glass and steel campus that we see being proposed and developed in the partnership between Virginia Tech and Amazon in Northern Virginia, on the screen right before you. And whether in the classroom or for local industry and community, the key word has become innovation, innovation, innovation. And what that means in different contexts is up for debate, but just keep that in mind as we move forward. So with such importance, we have also seen higher education's growing control over the economic and political governance in urban America, or what I call the rise of universities. Across America, universities have become big business. In our cities, they're company towns with some amazing impacts. But there is also a cost for those living in the shadows of these ivory towers. Campus expansions and the medtech, pharmaceutical, software developments that take place on property tax exempt campus buildings also can raise housing costs and displace residents in the neighborhoods largely of color that surround campuses. Higher education's broad control over labor, and not faculty, but support staff, cafeteria workers, groundskeepers, etc. The higher education's broad control over that kind of labor can lower wage ceilings and suppress collective bargaining efforts for entire cities. Nonprofit university medical centers emphasize profitable boutique services, high-profile research, or prioritize student services to the detriment of the indigent care that they've been required to offer in exchange for the tax-exempt status. Finally, campus police forces surveil and profile these very same residents and are rarely held to public account while they're given public power to police everyday residents. Now, even if all schools don't hold all of this power, we are witnessing greater swaths of our cities being turned into a campus. And given the anchor model's early ambitions to engage in the surrounding community in socially just and equitable ways, we must begin to beg the question, well, how do we get to this point? How do we get here to these universe cities? And most importantly, how do we reclaim the early anchor model in this new era? So let's go back before we go forward. By the 1990s, we start witnessing a renewed interest in urban life. After decades of white flight and urban divestment, the grandchildren of suburban sprawl, young professionals and empty nesters begin to power a back to the city movement in the 1990s. In this moment, cities begin to compete for these young professionals and empty nesters for their tax base. At the same time, with the suburbanites, their vision of the city is precisely the commercial amenities associated with university life. Concerts, coffee shops, foot traffic congestion, fully wired networking. These are the things that returnees have been marking as a desirable urban experience. So amongst early anchor advocates, professionals in city government, we begin to see a conversation about the economic and political and social life of downtowns and cities turning from the decline in industry, smokestacks, and the turn to bell towers, university campuses. And so within this context, we begin to see the rise of the notion of anchor institutions as economic engines with the effort to revitalize a renewed interest in urban life. That's on one side. On the other side, you have universities trying to compensate for shrinking state budgets, that cities and states are contributing less to higher education. So they're seeking alternative revenue streams. And we begin to witness the idea of university becoming more entrepreneurial. So we put together the ambitions of city leaders with the strategies of university administrators, we begin to see an interest convergence around the benefits of turning our cities into some version of a campus. This is the moment when we begin to see the rise of the anchor institution ideal. This is a part of the story that we really talk about. We talk about anchor institutions, that it was emerging at the same moment of this kind of political economic interest in cities and universities trying to retrofit themselves in the face of shrinking state and city contributions. that this is going on at the same time that we see the rise in discussions around anchor institutions from the very beginning. So the anchor ideal begins to emerge at the moment of, again, revived campus rebellions, the divestment from South Africa, apartheid by university budgets, conversations around gentrification, but also the realization of there being scarce public resources for higher education. So in short, higher education begins looking for new ways to explain its value as a public good, to open the doors for new resources, new revenues. In this moment, we have the rise of Campus Compact, largely instigated by university presidents and other organizations like the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. Together, they push for the ideals of civic education and community outreach, with amazing deliverables like early childhood early childhood ed, college scholarships, lifelong learning, as well as community improvement investments. Perfect example of this reality takes place at the University of Pennsylvania. And there's no better example of this than someone like Ira Harkavy and the Netter Center for Community Partnerships, who I talk about in the book. Ira, at the very beginning, brings forward a very broad view of what we call service learning. The idea that service learning can allow universities to be their best selves, but also allowing service learning to be at the table where big decision makers at university administration levels are making conversation and decisions about the future of universities in urban environments. So Ira and the Netter Center begin to push forward a menu of things like service learning courses, working with neighborhood schools, pushing medical screenings, small business incubators, professional development training for K through 12 teachers, and procurement programs for local small businesses. But at the same time that the Netter Center was pushing out a vision of service learning, of being civically and community engaged, you have other units at the university, like the real estate office, watching what Ira's doing and deploying the very same language of things like being a good neighbor, but for very different ends. So you see the image on the upper right corner, upper left corner. This is UC Square, the kind of one of the results of this using good neighbor ideals in the anchor vision for a very different reason. So when we think about something like land management, for the real estate office, land management, being a good neighbor in the realm of land management meant banking land, purchasing and banking land for future profitable research laboratories to recruit high-profile researchers and university professors to come and do their work that can generate IP and royalties on land that was procured by the university in the name of being a good neighbor. Being a good neighbor meant building upscale retail on 40th Street for high-profile students, but also the families of these researchers to want to come to a previously economically depressed West Philadelphia and stay. Being a good neighbor also meant underwriting employee home ownership programs to encourage researchers, students, faculty, and their families to live in West Philadelphia. But again, the consequences of this is raising costs above the means of current residents. So then you have this conversation around doing community outreach, but the question becomes, well, who is the community? Are we talking about the long-standing residents that have been there for 40 years, or the new academic community made up of students, researchers, and their families who have displaced the long-term residents? Another example, University of Chicago. When I was writing about these issues, an administrator at the Office of Civic Engagement, I call him Matthew, he was aware of what was going on. He read the book, and he's like, everything you're talking about is exactly what I've been dealing with on the ground. At the bottom left corner, you see the development that emerged in Hyde Park neighborhood of Southside Chicago called Harper Court. Publicly, Harper Court was billed as an amenity for the greater South Side in the name of civic engagement. But Matthew told me behind closed doors, Harper Court's priority was to maintain UChicago's reputation as a world-class university. That Harper Court's focus was meant to attract university affiliates with big grants or drawing power. And the audience for a project like Harper Court was not the South Side of Chicago. It was the university's peer institutions like Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, Emory, etc. Matthew said that the height of the kind of double talk in this notion of community and community civic engagement was at the point at which the commercial real estate division for the university was placed inside the office of civic engagement. So at this moment, civic engagement offices was stuck with facilitating a real estate development process that they didn't control. That their job was to be the friendly face when community members got mad about university expansion, and their job was to explain how this real estate expansion was some form of civic engagement. Matthew eventually left the office because he was stuck with the struggle between his vision of the urban campus, meaning the university and its broader community, versus what he called the urban campus lifestyle, the creation of local urban amenities solely to the benefit and interest of the high-profile researchers and families that the university was trying to attract. Now, lest you think I just talk about places outside, places away, UPenn, UChicago. The important point here is that these two titans of Research One development became models for other research schools, but also small liberal arts urban colleges like my own institution of Trinity University. About 8 years ago, I sat in a faculty meeting at Trinity whereby there were slides of UPenn and UChicago's as the models for how a small liberal arts college could do urban work in similar ways. So how did that turn itself out? How did that work out? Well, a little bit of backstory. For decades, Trinity College and its alumni had seen a financially struggling Black, brown, and poor city of Hartford as a liability. But in the 1990s, and particularly in the 2000s, we begin to see, and this is a national story, you have state honors colleges at large Research One state schools competing in a shrinking higher education market, creating honors colleges that offer small class sizes and intimate contact, the very same thing that Trinity built itself for at an $80,000 price tag, but for a third of the price. So Trinity was in panic mode. How do we carve out a distinctive brand for ourselves if these state honors colleges are offering the very same things we offer, but for a third of the price? So after decades of looking at Hartford as a liability, Trinity rebranded itself as a liberal arts college in a capital city. The reason why they did this also was because other schools in the area like UConn and St. Joseph's already had downtown satellite campuses. And now Trinity is the only college actually in Hartford, and yet it was caught flat-footed in building downtown campuses. So in the face of this, Trinity built its Liberal Arts Action Lab. It was important because it partnered with local organizations to study and solve social problems. But people began to ask, well, why is this downtown campus in the isolated downtown Constitution Plaza? There were many property vacancies in the Latinx neighborhood of Park Street, which is right down the street from Trinity College, where there is now a new anchor, a branch of the Hartford Public Library. Or there were vacant properties in the predominantly Black neighborhood of the North End. So people began to do the equations, do the analysis, and they began to say, wait a minute, we are in the downtown Constitution Plaza area, but the needs are in the Park Street area and in the North End. Why are we in the downtown area? Because this is the location of the Central Business District. So the focus here was that to be downtown is not really about solving social problems, but it's about securing student internships at the nearby State House and in the nearby financial district. Another reason why this lab and this downtown campus was in the Constitution Plaza in the downtown area was because people found out that schools as far away as Brown University in Rhode Island had cornered the market on what do you call it? Lucrative graduate certificate classes for for professionals that wanted to get additional education that were working in the downtown area. So Trini said, well, if Brown is coming all the way from Rhode Island to do this work, and we're right here, this downtown campus can allow us to secure a greater foothold in that lucrative graduate certificate market. So people concluded that in certain ways, this liberal arts action lab served as political cover, whereby urban engagement downtown really meant career development. So when we look at these examples of UPenn, UChicago, and yes, Trinity, the conclusion might be, well, what's happened to the anchor model? What's happened to urban and community and civic engagement? And we might hang our heads low, but there are other alternatives. When I offer this critique, these analyses, people fold their arms and say, well, yes, you're an academic, you have critique, but what are solutions? So one example that I discuss in the book is the powerful case study of the University of Winnipeg. What's happening there? At the University of Winnipeg, they're facing things that either we are facing in American universities and colleges, or things we're gonna face in the next 10 years. That the market for the traditional targeted audience of student higher education, middle class, predominantly white, suburban, those families aren't having children. Well, in Winnipeg, that's already happening. It's already happened. So in the 2000s, they witnessed a demographic shift where that demographic is not having kids, but their student body increased by 10,000 students over a 10-year period. Who are those students? When you look around the campus in downtown Winnipeg, it's predominantly what they call new Canadians, immigrant communities, and indigenous communities, because the province where Winnipeg is located has the largest indigenous population in the world. So instead of turning its back on these new demographics, the University of Winnipeg said, we're going to look at this from a sustainable standpoint. We're going to offer a vision of sustainability that doesn't just mean LEED certified buildings. It's going to mean sustainability from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, from an educational perspective, and from an cultural perspective. So in sustainability meant, what are the needs to sustain the communities that surround our campus that are becoming the feeder into our student body? Well, the new demographic was largely indigenous and new Canadian. They were largely adults, and they had children. So the University of Winnipeg said, if we're going to sustain those communities, we have to sustain their culture, because they're not coming as individual student units. Their whole family is coming to the campus. We need to reorganize our vision of the campus in order to make ourselves viable in this new higher education marketplace. We have to reorganize our vision of civic and community engagement. So what did that mean? That meant this building in the background of the slide, building a downtown commons right in the downtown of Winnipeg, not far from the campus. This building is a residential complex that has housing at 4 different price points. A premium rate, and that's the 12 units with the balconies you see, market rate, affordable rate, and rent geared to income. So the premium rates help underwrite the housing at the other areas, at the other price points. This commons area is open not just to students, but to residents in the community, professionals from the downtown area, and at one point they had 12 units reserved for Syrian refugees at the point of the Syrian refugee crisis. How does this work? Because they are the University of Winnipeg, they had the leverage to ask the province to do away with the requirements and allow every unit in this building to be created at the same quality of design. So when you move into this building, you don't know whether you're moving into a market rate unit or a rent built geared to income unit. They're all interchangeable. They have the air system retrofitted for indigenous smudging practices in the common areas. And for those individuals who can't afford an individual Wi-Fi, they have free Wi-Fi also in the common areas. What else do they do? If you don't know anything about Winnipeg, the area is brick cold about 10 months out of the year. So indoor spaces are at a high premium. So the university built a state-of-the-art recreational facility, but they placed a community charter over the governing of that recreational facility. What did that mean? That meant that local community groups have reserved use of the space and time of the space, not at 8 in the morning or 12 at midnight, but at peak hours. They get guaranteed hours in this student recreational facility that is governed by a community charter. And finally, they have this creation of diversity foods. Now, they originally had a contract with one of the multinational food service providers like Marriott, Tedesco, Chartwells, etc. But they got rid of that contract and created their own local diversity foods company. The important point about that is that what they do on the supply side is that they procure 70% of their raw materials from small farms from within a 100-kilometer radius. Every food preparation station has a compost bin next to it. And they take their cooking oil and send it out to be converted into biodiesel. On the labor side, 75% of their workers are from what they call hard-to-employ communities. LGBTQ+, First Nations, recently incarcerated, single mothers, and they're begin the process of shifting from simply just offering wages to profit sharing. So these examples like this and other examples I talk about in the work inspired me to create what I've called my Smart Cities Research Lab, to begin to take the ideas that I've learned in my research and begin to create them and turn them into action. In this lab, we research and consult on best practices for building equitable urban communities more broadly, but with a specific focus on university-driven development. So within this, we have some general calls, some general visionings. We call for school reparations from university-driven practices of slavery, indigenous land seizures, Jim Crow practices, and urban renewal practices. We call for pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, to compensate for expanding university campuses without that continue to hold tax exemption. We call for community benefits agreements. We call for community engaged endowments. We call for community-based planning and zoning boards and reassessments of land that's owned or held by campuses for putting them on the tax rolls. And we call for a policing divest invest model. Now, I've gone pretty quickly through those general calls. Now, in the last minutes that I have remaining, I want to show you how we've taken these calls and put them into on-the-ground, real-time campaigns. So I want to highlight 4 national campaigns that the lab has had a hand in assisting and in leading. We have the pilot campaign, the payment in lieu of taxes campaign, whereby with the city of New Haven, we were able to assist the New Haven Rising organization in getting Yale finally to the table and offering an additional $52 million in tax compensation over the next 6 years. Right now, we're also working with communities in Boston, in the state of Massachusetts, in the state of Rhode Island, and communities in Ithaca, New York, and Baltimore City, trying to push forward payment pilot projects that are being negotiated as we speak. The lab is working with the Social Mission Alliance, and we sit on the board where we're advocating for efforts to infuse social mission into health professional education and incorporate social accountability into medical school accreditation standards. What does this mean? Right now, medical centers are required to offer community care, but they get to self-report the kind of care they offer. So many of these schools do not do the work that they're required to do. So what we're trying to do is say the social mission of these medical centers must be tied to their school accreditation and their rankings, which are things that medical schools care about. So just recently, we had a Hill Day working with state legislators or congressional legislators to figure out ways to tie medical school accreditation and ranking to their social mission reporting. We also have the project called the New Shop Floor. I am on the National Council of the American Association of University Professors. In this vision of New Shop Floor, we're saying organizers can't just think about labor in terms of wages, working conditions, and academic freedom. When universities have control over entire cities where their workers sit. So we must connect labor and living conditions from across the campus to host communities where workers reside and campuses extract wealth in their expansion into the communities. So this is being called the New Shop Floor, and we're working with local AUP chapters like Rutgers University, where they're incorporating this vision, and a part of their recent negotiations, they won a multi-million-dollar earmark for community contributions and development. Finally, we are building out this thing called the Renewal Project, which is a national collaborative tracing higher education's lead role in the urban renewal era demolition and displacement of Black and brown communities and its present day legacy. So the point here is that in the 1950s and 60s, universities became a friendly face of urban renewal through the renegotiation of federal policy. They demolished and displaced communities that were largely Black and brown, like West Philadelphia, in the creation of University City, like East Baltimore in the creation of Eager Park, like the downtown Sacramento neighborhood in the creation of what today is called Aggie Square. And so these developments, these demolitions in the 50s are precisely the very same sites today that are the sites for knowledge communities, research parks, innovation districts. So in this renewal project, we are doing the work of historical recovery to tell the story of that process. We are teaching classes, we are engaging in placemaking, and we're also building out visions of reparations. Just recently, the Lindentown neighborhood in Athens, Georgia, that was demolished to make way for University of Georgia expansion, has recently renamed a part of an internal campus street, Lindentown Way. So these are some of the things that we're supporting, that we're a part of. Smaller campaigns include a equitable, a mandatory inclusionary zoning policy in West Philadelphia that was spearheaded by a local congressperson in West Philadelphia. We worked with, and I mentioned just briefly to one student at Penn Medical, that the low-hanging fruit on campuses is all the food that's thrown away by cafeterias every day because of health code requirements. What if universities took that food and packaged it into healthy meals for communities in need? I've said this at universities all over the country, but it took a medical student on his own, Cooper Penner, in West Philadelphia, to work with the local DSA chapter and volunteer hours on the part of Black and brown cafeteria workers to take food on Fridays, package it into healthy meals, and they now distribute it to community groups in West Philadelphia every week. Again, low-hanging fruit. We're also working with graduate labor unions and nursing at Michigan and nursing students at Marquette to begin the process of police divestment investment. Divesting from armed police and investing in non-carceral approaches to public and community safety. At University of Michigan, their labor union has included the call for an unarmed non-police response team as a part of their current negotiations with the university. I've worked with nursing students at Marquette University, my alma mater, to begin talking about divesting from armed responses and creating a primary prevention clinic program where nursing students would work there and do preventative care for communities in replacement of public or armed police. So this is all the work that's being done with just one faculty member and a small team of undergraduates. Just imagine if this could be lined up with the national network of TRUCEN and Campus Compact more broadly, just for example. Ultimately, thinking about this work, we must discard the dated myth of higher education as simply a schoolhouse, as a place that simply just does educational work, because the quaint notion of the Ivy Tower is dead. DEI and civic engagement work has in some ways been restricted to the educational practices of diversifying curriculum, faculty, and student bodies, or service learning. Yet education has become the smallest thing that universities actually do. Universities today sit at the center of what we call the knowledge economy, now driving our cities. Its schools are setting our housing costs and land use practices. It's schools that are setting the wage ceilings and work conditions. It's schools that are setting our policy, our policing priorities, and the healthcare standards for whole cities. And yet we have this all going on in the name of higher education, while the work we do in civic and community engagement is happening in a parallel fashion. So the work of civic and community engagement and the expansion and impact of universities have become like two ships passing in the night. So we must create a more direct and robust alignment between what we do in our sector and what's actually happening as university expansion and development. I understand. I'm not here to beat up on you. I understand that the struggle is real, to fight the good fight, to make the actions of campus expansion be more aligned and governed by the highest ambitions of civic engagement. So what I'm saying is, in this sector, let us be the bridge and no longer the buffer between university interests and the true social impact that we all seek to see. Because universities sit at the center of today's urban political economy, if we remain steadfast with this work, we are in the institutional position to truly change the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davarian. Now, this is going to be a real trick to me to see if I can figure out how to get myself back up as a spotlight.
Let's see if I can stop the share.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, I think I can do it. Add spotlight. There we go. Awesome. Thank you all for being here. We have over 100 people who have joined us. I just want to, I know that I've been involved in a lot of conversations leading up to today with so many colleagues and partners from throughout the years who have said, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And, as in Davarian's PowerPoint deck, I just want to name that, he calls out two organizations that I happen to be pretty close to. Campus Compact, where I'm currently working, then the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities, where I spent over 15 years. And while there's been a myriad of organizations that have worked really hard to think about how we advance this anchor mission, we have not had enough conversations like the one we're having today that really talk about it as we're trying to move forward in a way that really is addressing systemic inequities and what that means in our community. And as Davarian and I had wonderful conversations talking about who the people are that are behind this work every day and what they're waking up every day trying to accomplish. I've just really valued and appreciated the openness of the conversation I've had to date with Davarian. And honestly, what I've heard from across the field that has said, and many people who are here today, who have been the colleagues I've worked with for a decade plus, who have been advancing in this very mission and thinking about how we move forward this work. I'm just really thankful to have space and to be in a community with others that are willing to really dive in and have some of these hard conversations that are just so important in our work. I want to name that how we got here today with Davarian was because of the leadership of TRUCEN. We have an incredible leadership committee made up of 5 individuals. Nirja Abramondan, from the director of the Edward Ginsburg Center at University of Michigan, Renee Brown, the director for the Center for Community Engaged Learning at Michigan State, Laurel Hurt, the director for the Center for Community Engaged Learning at University of Minnesota, James Rowland, the senior director of the Center for Civic and Community Engagement at Emory University, and finally, Shalom Staub, the director for the Center for Community Engagement at UCLA. It was in conversation with this group where it really came up, that Davarian's name came up and said, this should be who we should bring to the table. This should be a conversation we should be having. And I'm so appreciative to them. For those that joined us mid-talk, I just want to come back to you and tell you what the rest of this day is going to look like. We wanted to honor the fact that TRUCEN is a space for conversation and dialogue. So in just a moment, we're going to hear from Shalom, who's going to talk really about, and Shalom deserves a lot of the credit that got us to today. It was Shalom who really was the initial one that raised Davarian's books, and I'm reading this, we should be talking about this. He's going to talk about how he's been thinking about this work in the UCLA context and how this book has been thoughtful, a piece of thoughtfulness around their work. But then we're going to move into small groups, and I hope that many of you will stay with us. We're going to have small group discussions. We're going to give you some framing questions, but then we're going to come back for a conversation with Davarian. We know that's why people are here for about 30 minutes to really talk about what we're hearing from those that are with us today, where we need to go, and have some conversation around what's needed in this important work. So that's the plan for the rest of our time together. I'm going to turn it over now. I'm going to take Davarian off, and I'm using all my possible skills here and add Shalom in. And again, I am appreciative and excited to welcome Shalom from UCLA's Center for Community Engagement to share some remarks.
Thank you, Bobby, and Davarian, kudos to you. I've read your book, spoken with you on numerous occasions now, and this last half hour was a complete treat and also very thought-provoking. You took us way beyond what is in your book, and that last section on the work of the Smart Cities Lab was really inspiring. So thank you, and look forward to more conversation in just a few minutes. My role now is to offer a bit of a reflection on how I came to be familiar with Davarian's work and how it has shaped our work at UCLA. So I've had the privilege to lead an element of the UCLA strategic planning process. This had been a stalled process under a new executive vice chancellor and provost. It got rejuvenated. And in 2023, I took on the leadership role for a goal, in fact, goal one of the UCLA strategic plan, which focuses on deepening UCLA's engagement with Los Angeles. That's significant in that while UCLA is located in Los Angeles, and individual scholars, and I want to give a shout out to my colleagues from UCLA who are in the room today. These are some of the scholars whose work has focused on and in and with communities of Los Angeles. But historically, UCLA has grown to think of itself in national terms, even international terms, not as a locally rooted, locally connected university. Certainly, we have not been using anchor institution language historically. So this strategic goal of deepening UCLA's engagement with Los Angeles represents a significant effort to add this local orientation and engagement. And it's reflected in a new beginning in the language that we now hear being used at the university, seeing itself as the only public research university in a major American city. So with the emphasis on public research university. And so there, it's a beginning of repositioning UCLA in its public mission. So at first glance, though, UCLA doesn't follow the patterns that Davarian has described at major institutions like University of Chicago, UPenn, Johns Hopkins, which are all located in disinvested communities and then expanded and took over those areas. UCLA is hemmed in by affluence. We've got Bel Air to our north. We've got Brentwood to our west. We've got Beverly Hills to our east. Westwood just below the university. These are not areas that they contain the university and are well resourced to resist any further encroachment from the university. At the same time, UCLA sits on the unceded lands of the Tongva Gabrieleno peoples. Westwood itself is historically an area with racially restricted housing restrictions. The university follows a broad pattern of extractive research practices, not specific to UCLA, but endemic to research universities across the US. UCLA Health, which is a major health provider in Los Angeles, has a network of clinics serving primarily affluent and middle-class areas of Los Angeles, neglecting working class and the Black and brown communities in disinvested communities. And in recent memory, following the murder of George Floyd, the UCLA Jackie Robinson Stadium was used by the Los Angeles Police Department as a field jail for processing arrested protesters of police violence. So that this is in very recent memory. So it's in this juxtaposition of the strategic plan, as well as this broader pattern of university practices and the egregious example of the Jackie Robinson Field Jail, that Davarian's work was brought to my attention by a dear colleague, Ananya Roy, who leads the Institute on Inequality and Democracy at UCLA. And then, with awareness of Davarian's work, I brought the book to the strategic planning group that I was leading, and it led to really thoughtful conversation among our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members who comprise that group. And so it shaped our conversation about what does it mean to build this deeper engagement. It means recognizing that we need to rebuild trust and repair harm where actions of the university have negatively impacted people and communities. It means needing to develop real partnerships. It means centering equity and mutuality and reciprocity linked to transparency and public accountability. And I want to say a little bit more about that in just a moment. It means needing to ensure that community members and partners, particularly in historically marginalized communities of Los Angeles, have significant input to shape the university's future deepened work in Los Angeles. And that communities must be recognized as being the repositories of knowledge and experience, as well as the owners of their stories and data. And that they must be engaged in the development of research questions, in data analysis, and when appropriate to the research, any resulting recommendations. So one of the elements of the strategic plan that our group has put forward is the need for data collection and transparency. A commitment to systematically collecting data on community engagement across all domains of the campus, identifying and collecting and reporting on metrics that track the quality of our partnerships and the impact of community engaged research and teaching. But like Davarian is saying, it's not, we recognize that talking about metrics of accountability cannot stay focused exclusively in this curricular teaching and research dimension. It needed to account for the university as this kind of civic behemoth in a city. And so our plan is calling for establishing audit capacity to identify, collect, and report on metrics that track the impact of UCLA's operations on LA and its residents, with community involvement in developing those metrics, including but not limited to land and real estate acquisition, hiring, procurement, and policing. Exactly the issues that Davarian had identified as core issues in his book. And to ensure that UCLA's operations contribute to equitable, inclusive, and just outcomes for the residents of Los Angeles. So the strategic plan's actions position it within this responsibility of transparency and accountability. Now, we're a work in progress. I can't report on major steps that have already been taken, except one major step, which is that UCLA just acquired a 300,000 square foot building in downtown Los Angeles and is transforming it into what will be known as UCLA Downtown. Just within the last week, a programming board has been established. I'm on that programming board, and one of my first actions is going to be recommending the viewing of this session by all the members of the programming board. And we're about to publicly launch the strategic plan later, in next month on campus and in the city. And I can say that it includes millions of dollars of investment to support community engaged research and community engaged teaching and the development of university community partnerships. So with that, I will stop as a kind of reflection on how Davarian's work has influenced our thinking at UCLA, as I say, a work in progress, and turn it back over to Bobby to set us up for the conversation ahead.
Thank you, Shalom. And I think what's really powerful about Shalom's example and vulnerability around what's happening at UCLA is it's a really tangible example of how community engaged leaders can really be in a driver's seat for advancing these conversations. And I come back to some of the conversations that happened when we were in Minneapolis together last spring. And that was a flavor of it, of really, folks in the room saying, I want to advance these questions. I know that I'm interested in making an impact beyond my center, behind the work that I really feel responsibility and ownership of, but, finding ways to do it. And I think the way that Shalom is advancing the conversation and work through the strategic planning process, I think is a really great example for the field. Okay, we are going to move into breakout groups. I am going to go ahead and send us off. The questions are in the chat. Again, we're gonna limit this to actually 10 minutes, because what we really want to do is come back and have Davarian start responding more to what people are saying and what people are thinking, and having a little bit more time for dialogue with Davarian for today. So 10 minutes, those are 3 questions. If you can get to the first 2, go for it. The thing I want to note is that this is one Jamboard for all of us. And so we're going to look for the groups to really highlight the really big takeaways out of the small groups. What's kind of coming up for folks that you want to make sure you elevate for a bigger conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and send you off.